Welcome to Walking Through the Word. It's been a minute, but I'm glad to be joining you again. And we're going to go old school, as in Old Testament. And we're going to actually do some books that I've done some recent looks at, and ones that I really enjoy and love. And we're gonna focus the two books. There are two books in the Old Testament that are named after women. And we're going to tackle these books, and we're going to do it in chronological order, meaning that we're going to start with the Book of Ruth, and then after we finish Ruth, we're going to go to the Book of Esther. Now, these are important books for a variety of reasons, and we'll get into those things as we walk through the books. But Book of Ruth is one that is really one of my favorite Old Testament books, and I love this because it really speaks to the idea of God's loving kindness, which we will get into. But before we dive into Ruth too far, I want to kind of give a little bit of an overview of the book, and we're going to talk about some of the things that are of significance within the book. The first thing is we need to look at the time period. Now, the book of Ruth happens before Israel is a country, before Israel is really a nation under a king, okay? This takes place during the time of the Judges. Now, why is this significant? Because if you go back and you read the book of Judges, which is actually the book right before Ruth, you'll see that this was a time of, in some ways, lawlessness. The people of Israel, as it says at the end of Judges, they did whatever they saw fit, which means they weren't seeking God, they weren't looking for God, they weren't even listening to God. They would only listen to God whenever there was a time of difficulty. And so there was this cycle that happened in Judges. And it started off with the people disobeying God and ignoring God. And then it would come in and God would place judgment. Then the people would cry out. God would raise up a judge. The judge would rescue them. They would have a period of peace until the judge died. And then boom, the cycle would start all over again. And it's in the midst of this that Ruth shows up. Now, the story of Ruth is a beautiful story of redemption. It's a beautiful story of God's love, but it happens in the most unlikeliest of places. Because you see, Ruth is not just some little Jewish girl that we're reading about. No, instead, Ruth is, she's a Moabite. Now, why is that significant? Well, if you go over into Genesis chapter 19, you see the origins of the Moabites, and it's not a pretty picture. The Moabites did not start under good circumstances. If you remember the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the character of Lot, the man Lot, flees from the town with his daughters and his wife can't stand it. She looks back. She gets turned into a pillar of salt while Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed. But then Lot and his two daughters, they go hang out in this area in the mountains near a town called Zor. Now, why this is a terrible story is because the girls decide, hey, you know what? We're never going to get married. We're never going to do this. And so we need to have kids, because if we don't have kids, then we're pariahs, we're outcasts. And so they do what to them seems like a right thing, to us is a terrible, horrible, awful thing. And they lay with their father. Well, when they become pregnant, the oldest daughter has a son, and they call him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites. So from his point on, this incestuous relationship begins with the Moabites. But it doesn't stop there, because the people of Moab are they're not looked upon in a friendly way by the Israelites. And you have to go all the way back to Deuteronomy chapter 23. And you start reading in verse 3 that there are two groups of people that are specifically named as never being able to enter into the assembly of the Lord. Those are the Ammonites and the Moabites. And it says here very specifically that they can't even, they are detestable by God. Not even in the 10th generation are they allowed to come. To be clear, by the time the story of Ruth comes, they're not in the 10th generation. The Moabites they are persona non grata. Now, when it says 10th generation, it doesn't mean a literal. It just basically means forever and ever the Moabites are detestable. They are not welcome. For they did not, in verse 4, come to meet you with bread and water on your way when you came out of Egypt. And they hired Balaam, son of Beor, from Pethor in Aram Naharaim to produce a curse on you. So this is basically talking about the Moabites have this enmity against the people of Israel. And that's what makes the book of Ruth so powerful, is that in the midst of willful disobedience by the Israelites, and we're going to see it at the very beginning of Ruth chapter 1, God's grace still shines. And that's what Ruth is about. God's loving kindness, God's grace, God's mercy, and most importantly, God's plan of redemption for all of humanity. Okay, that's our introduction. Tomorrow we'll dive into Ruth chapter 1, verse 1.